model, they got a safety feature in it versus the older one. If you lose air for some reason, you'll notice the green light will shut off here in a second. And that, which one goes the wrong way, see the light went out there. And that does a safety feature where you don't burn your element up inside here. One of the other things that they did, let me get this back up to where we're supposed to be at here, is they made this hose burn proof because the earlier models, people was all the time getting this hot iron up against this hose, blowing a hole in it. And so they changed that where you can put heat up against it. So that's our basic safety things. You get ready to shut it down, you shut the switch off, you need to leave the air on it for probably about 10-15 minutes to finish cooling your ceramic heating element off. So we'll get started on a simple weld here. I know everybody wants to start out with the most complicated train wreck possible, but we're going to show you on a flat piece of plastic, a simple flat weld. And to start with, we'll put some aluminum tape on the back side. What the aluminum tape does is just holds the two edges together flush, so that you do your weld, your plastic is even, and then you'll have less filler that you got to put on the top side of it if your edges are even to start with. And everybody got their safety glasses on, and are off to the side. So I mean, when I get ready to grind this, it's going to throw plastic to my left and right. What we're going to do here is we're going to grind about as thick and as wide as our ribbon is. So when we lay our bead down, we want to grind this about as wide as that and about as thick as that. So when we put our bead in it, it's almost flush with the surface. So I'll prep this right quick. What I'm doing on the end, the reason why I did this T is when we weld this, if we put as a T on the end, it gives us more strength on the back side. On the front side we won't do that, but on the back side, on your edge here, it just gives it more strength so it doesn't rip open. Let me go just a little bit wider for that wider rod. Okay, so now we're ready to start to weld. So we'll switch our switch over on, from air over to nitrogen. And how you tell if this is ready to weld is now you put your heat down here. Actually, that's really wide. You'll feel it starting to get tacky. And the guys on this side, you'll see a black bubble, a plastic puddle that will start to form. And once that starts to melt, there it starts to go. See that plastic starting to form there, that bubble in front of my rod. And what I try to do is I hold this tip about at a 45 degrees. So I'm heating the plastic and rod evenly. Now there's some cases where if you got a thinner rod, you'll put less heat to the rod, or if you got a thicker rod, you'll put more heat to it. But once you get proficient at this, you should be able to weld about 6 inches a minute. Get the end of that. Grab our hot iron here, and we'll just... Now what we're going to do here, notice how that's smoking. Okay, what that shows is the plastic isn't burning pure, it's oxidizing with air. Now I put nitrogen to it, notice how it quit smoking. Now the plastic is melting pure, burning completely pure. So that's why we're using nitrogen. Remember I said earlier, I explained why we're using nitrogen. They discovered that that's the only way to properly weld the polypropylene and polyethylene plastic is to use nitrogen, which is an inert gas which won't explode or catch on fire, and it gets the impurities out of your plastic weld as you're welding it. So what I'm doing here is I'm just ironing the seams in, the edges in, At this point, the plastic's still in a liquid stage, which anybody could probably rip that real easy. But once that dries, then it'll come harder. So now I'm going to go ahead and put our main weld down, and now everybody behind me will be able to see this puddle I was talking about. Yesterday we were welding a door trim panel where there was a speaker cut out, and they was just putting that back in. And so you actually can weld a curve with this. You can fill gaps with it. Once you get some practice with this thing, you'll find out you can do quite a bit of different types of welds with it. Again, now we'll just iron this in. And now we're using the same rod. This rod is a polypropylene rod, which is the exact same material that is in the bumper cover. So once we get done, it will flex. It'll have the same elasticity as the bumper. Now there you put your rod down, switch it over to your compressor air, so you're not using your nitrogen. I'm going to go ahead and flip this over, and we'll do the front repair right quick, and then we'll let this piece dry while I'll show you some other welds, and then we'll come back to it and feather edge it and let you look at it some more. Let me prep this right quick. Now once you get practice with this, you should be able to weld about 6 inches a minute. And that particular rod, I don't know if you notice how much faster I went on the front side. It was a thinner rod, and I could tell it was melting into plastic a whole lot faster than the thicker rod. So while that's getting cool, now at this point, a lot of people, you don't want to take air from your compressor and blow air in there to cool it. You can cool it, but let it flash over or skim over first, because at this point it's still liquid and you'd be blowing impurities back into it, contaminations. So let it skim over if you're going to force air dry it. Once it skims over, then you can blow air on it. But the best bet is just let it dry naturally, just let it sit there. So while that's doing that, we're going to move over to a couple of little specialty welds. Once you guys get out in the shop, I know David, I'm sure you've seen this, a lot of these tabs are just broke on the bumper where it snaps in, where it joins the fender. Well, that's all that's wrong, is this tab is broke. If you use a two-part epoxy, sure, we can glue this. I sell Auto 3M, Auto Mix, Fuzer, you know, any name you think of, I can sell it. But the disadvantage of that material is once you put it on there and get it thick enough to hold, you're too thick to snap in where the clip, where it snaps in. So by the time you sand it down to make it thin enough, you sand all your epoxy off, and so you don't have any material left to actually hold it. It's going to be harder than the original, and it'll 9 times out of 10 it'll snap the minute you try to pop it back in. So we're going to show you how to do this little specialty type repair. What we're going to do is they're normally broke in the middle, but we're going to snip the ends off on each side. What this does is it divides your weak point into 2 sections instead of just 1, and we'll have our bond out here in the middle and not have a weak point in the center. And now this is a very high-tech tool. You can pick these up at any coffee place or like the Starbucks or something. Take your aluminum tape. The reason why you wrap it with aluminum tape so your plastic doesn't stick to it. And so we'll just clamp that to the bottom of this, get you a couple little small alligator clips. And what this will allow us to do is lay our welding rod right there on top of that as they come through. And the company now, Urethane Supply, has actually developed a rod that is thin enough that almost matches the width of that tab. So what we're going to do is lay that bead right over the top of that, flip it over, and run a second bead. But we need to prep this first. And what we're going to do is sand a little bit of material off the top here to lay our bead in here. Okay, switch our nitrogen over. Now I get to the bridge where the gap is. I want to pull my heat back. Just put a little bit on the rod and bring it on across. Then once I get over to this other side again, apply the heat back. And what we're going to do is we're going to use these pliers here to kind of shape this a little bit more, and then we'll never flip it over, we'll shape it. But at this point, the guys that are over here behind me can see how wavy this is. So we're going to apply heat back to it again, kind of warm it up. And that's where you don't need that so wide. Now at this point you can see we got one half of it done running across there. We're going to flip it over and run a bead across the bottom side of it. And the bead that we run across the bottom will actually go ahead and weld it to the rod that's already there where the gap is. So let's prep this right quick. Now this time that I run the rod across that gap, I'm going to actually weld it to the rod that we left on there from before, and I'm actually going to melt it to that rod. And then as we come over to the black plastic, the original bumper.
Why do you push it back over the air whenever you're not welding?
So we're not wasting the nitrogen, and also you got to keep an constant airflow going on the material. And so again, I'm going to heat this up, and we'll use these pliers to form this, give it a better form. And And then the reason why you constantly running air through the unit is so that heating element doesn't get too hot with the ceramic heating. Now, it's an American-made heating element. It's not an import. They're like $60 or so, and they should last you, I think Leon said his lasted over 5 years. The only reason why it went out was his air compressor went off. He went in the house to go get a cup of coffee, came out, and his air compressor had conked out, and it got so hot that it actually melted the handle. It was just dripping on the floor. Okay, so as you can see, we got a repair here, but we need to kind of shape it up a little bit to match the actual tab. And to do that, it also is a little bit thicker. So there again, we can use our little Dremel tool or VA or Roll-Lock. Now, some of these tabs are really sensitive on how thick they are because they have to fit it in the clip. So you may have to work with it, get the same thickness. Sometimes you can get a micrometer and actually measure one that's not broken to find out exactly how thick. Then this one I end up pretty good as far as it's almost perfect there. Got a little bit of the corner here I can grind out. You can use we got some hand files that are in the bag there. You can hand file it out. You can also use a Dremel tool with a bit. This little bit like this works really nice. You can get in there and fix that. Another thing you can do is use your hot iron, which this one here I'm not going to have to do very much to it all, and I can kind of stick it right there in that corner and just open that up just a little bit. And that's a quick, easy way too.
What's the different tip for?
Okay, the difference there is this is the standard tip that comes in. Notice how thick it is. If I stuck it in there, it would be melting both sides of that. Okay. We had took that tip and just ground it down with a grinder and made it thinner so we could get in there and do that. Just kind of modified it a little bit. So this is another, let me pass this around, and you can feel it's flexible like the original tab, and it's not hard and stiff, so there you snap it in that clip. It's going to snap in. Now, while you're passing that around, I'll tell you about another application that you'll run into out in the shops is on the GM Cobalts have a hinge, a plastic hinge on their bumpers. And so this has a real easy way to make a tab, and let me kind of show you one that's already made.
Yeah, insurance companies are now, you'll start seeing on the estimate, repair bumper instead of replace with these hinges that are broke off. So.
And this is a real easy fix to do. You can take the bumper where the original tab is, if there's one still left on it, take it over there to the bumper, trace it out. Or lots of times, even if you order a brand new bumper, before you get it and you get it out of the box, it's already broke off from shipping. So there again, you just draw the shape of your tab. Then you want to come a little bit wider than what your tab is. And let's say this is where it went on the bumper. Then what you do is you would just cut this out a little bit wider than what that tab is. Mark it on here. Take it, and just like I did on that gap, stick it in there, weld it on one side, flip it over, lay a bead on the other side, and you'll end up with a tab that's better than the factory. This is some samples here. What you want to do is before you weld it, though, go ahead and bend the plastic, get the bend in it, get it flexing. This you can bend 200-300 times, 100 times, and it's not going to break. I'll pass this around and let y'all kind of look at that. But that way you can repair a bumper, and like you said, you get paid more money to repair a bumper than to replace a bumper.
Can you use any of these rods on headlights?
You have to identify what type the headlight is, but yes.
Okay.
And I assume most of the headlights are...
almost all of them are polypropylene now.
Which is the
you
same
look on
material.
the back and it'll be stamped PP on the housing.
Some of those headlights, especially with the HID, they're running $700-800 up to $1,500 for just one housing. So,
and lots of times there's just a tab broke off or just a small piece that's broken. It's not that the headlight is. And you have to decide once you get out there. If it's a train wreck, replace it. But if it's just something small that's going to take you 15-20 minutes to repair, you'll get paid 2 or 3 hours to repair it versus replacing it. And so it actually makes you money as a tech and the shop owner money. Couple other samples here. This is a polyurethane, PUR, what it would be stamped on. Some BMWs, but also some of your older model. I think Fords up to 1995 was using this before they went to the polypropylene. But this type of plastic here, you can't weld with the nitrogen in the hot air. If you overheat it, it will turn brown and smoke. And once you do that, you destroy the integrity of the plastic. Nothing will stick to it and it won't hold. So you kind of almost do what we call a cold weld with this. You'll use your hot iron only and turn it about halfway down, and you'll use the polyurethane rod, which is this clear plastic rod, and all you do is heat the rod itself, or melt the rod itself. Don't melt the plastic. And if you look underneath this plastic in a microscope, it's real porous. It's full of holes. What you're basically doing is you're melting the rods into the pores. And on this particular repair, notice I didn't really V-groove that. We had some questions at French's Total, like, do you V-groove it on this? Do you V-groove it on both sides? That way you also get an interlocking weld, and you also have the pores on each side of the weld that the material's going to stick to. On this piece here, you could actually take this and just rip this off real easy. But where you rip this in half and beat it and weld it, you can actually pull a car around. They put it in a machine, and it had 8,500 pounds of pressure before it ripped, and then the weld didn't rip. It ripped 2 inches beside the weld. So this is some examples that you can do with a welder like that. Another thing here is we did a tab on a bumper where you had a hole is broken out. You can put a screwdriver in here and you can pull on this, and you can see it's as strong as the original plastic. Y'all want to pass that around. Well, let me come back to this piece now. It's dried off enough. Let me cooled off enough. Let me sand it with a DA and kind of feather it a little bit. I'll put these little pieces in so they don't fly everywhere when the table starts shaking.
If this was to crack again in the middle, could you weld over that again?
You could, yeah.
Would you just
Or what I would do if it cracked again in the middle, I would again just stick it on the edge. So that way your seam is out here on this point and not in the middle, where all your stress is. Yes. Next year I'm going to put in my budget for a better DA. Just to show you that it will feather. You know, if 80 grit's not causing it to roll up, you know, you're going to be able to.
That's awesome.
I'll pass this around. Now, you could take this and bend it like this, like a piece of wire, and eventually break it. But if a car bends it like this again, it's in a wreck again. But you can take this with a phone, like, you know, see the old phone book commercials where they rip, and you're not going to rip that. I'll let y'all pass that around and look at it. And as a technician, as you get out in the world, the cars are going to more and more plastic because they're going to constantly get it lighter and lighter. So plastic, whether if you like it or not, is kind of the way of the future. At this point, I would say y'all don't have a preference over metal versus plastic. But you know, some of the old body men, it's hard for them to change. They're like, well, they want to use metal, Bondo, but it's coming more and more plastic.
That'll work for interior and exterior?
You can use it on just about any type of plastic, dashes, door panels. Sometimes you have to identify, the hardest thing is on you get into plastics like that, is to identify the plastic once you figure out what it is. Now you can also, we just for kicks yesterday, we took a piece of door panel that we were welding, we took and made our own welding rod, and you can actually use